So today we're talking about independent sales reps, right?
So what are they?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of different terms that people use for this function. So what probably the most descriptive is independent sales rep. In the older days, or you might hear them referred to as manufacturer's rep, sometimes independent sales agents. I've heard the term commercial agent used, especially in Europe, and they all describe the same function. And this is a person or a firm that is contracted with a manufacturer to basically sell their goods or services independently. So they're contractors, not employees. And they differ from distributors because independent sales reps or independent sales agencies don't buy goods and then resell them. That's what a distributor is doing, is they're buying goods from the manufacturer and they're reselling them to the end user. The agent doesn't do that. The independent sales rep basically arranges the transaction and functions a lot of the way that you would expect an employed sales rep to function, in that they're going out and talking to the customers one on one, trying to understand needs, trying to develop the line of business. But then when the customer purchases, they purchase directly from the manufacturer.
So why not just hire a salesperson?
The number one reason people contract with independent sales agents is to save money. That's probably the number one reason. Think about your employed sales rep. And in our industry, life sciences, think about how much that person spends on a plane or in a car just getting from one meeting to another meeting. Even today in life sciences, there's a strong emphasis on in-person meetings. And what that does is it creates a lot of inefficiency. If I have to travel to Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Rochester, Minnesota to meet with a Mayo Clinic, there's not a lot of other customers I can meet with in Rochester, Minnesota that are buying my stuff. As if I'm an employee, then I have to make a trip out there. And it's basically at least a 24-hour turnaround. And I maybe get a couple hours of customer facing time during that period. It's very inefficient. Whereas if I'm an independent rep, and if I go to Rochester, Minnesota to the Mayo Clinic, I'm not just representing one product line, I'm representing multiple product lines. And so I can fill 1 or 2 full days of activity there that's customer facing on behalf of multiple different manufacturers. So that's where the cost savings comes in, is with the efficiency that an independent rep can have that an employee doesn't.
Right. Plus the other advantage there, and I've used these in the past, I've used independent reps in the past as well. One of the other advantages is that that rep is probably going to be a highly experienced salesperson that would be much more expensive than you would probably be comfortable hiring as a full-time rep, certainly if you're an early stage company. But the other thing is that they already have established relationships with large numbers of labs because they're already selling other lines into these labs. So they're already making the rounds, they're already having these conversations. And so you get to basically piggyback onto that entire set of relationships rather than hiring someone in cold and then having them start to build those relationships from scratch.
Right. Yes. The book of business, right? And the relationships. I think that's a definite advantage. You got to remember that firms and independent reps have different specializations, right? So you're not going to get a good rep usually that spans the whole breadth of life sciences with his different accounts. I'm an independent sales rep myself, for people that don't know me. And in the past year or two, I've had 150 accounts that I sell to. That's just a fraction of what's out there. And I can't be everybody's best friend. I can't be an expert on every account that's out there. And so I have my own niche in terms of product area that I work on and also geography. And so but within that, I've got a lot of very specific knowledge that you'd be hard pressed to find elsewhere. So that's a definite advantage.
Yeah. And you mentioned geography. And when I had independent sales reps, I was covering Western Hemisphere. So I was VP of sales and marketing for Biotech. And so I had full-time field sales reps for the US, but I hired an independent rep to cover Canada. And then I hired 2 independent reps to cover Latin America. So I hired one specifically for Brazil that was a Portuguese speaker and that understood the Brazilian market, which can be a very lucrative market to sell into for biotech.
Yep.
And then a second rep that covered the Spanish-speaking Latin American market, which was tended to be heavily Mexico City and Argentina were the two that where you saw a lot of activity. But what I was looking for were people that understood an overseas geography that we weren't as familiar with and that could bring that expertise. And so this is the other thing. If you're an Asian company entering North America or a European company entering North America, the absolute easiest entry point is to find a good independent sales rep.
Yeah. So a lot of people think about using a distributor for that, right? And if you're going to Europe and if you're selling from North America to Europe, I think that oftentimes a distributor is going to be a better choice because that's a situation where for market efficiency, it's going to be better customer to purchase from the distributor who's in country and for that distributor to be importing in and consolidating shipments and warehousing goods in the US. And it depends on the size of the manufacturer, but coming to the US, it's relatively easy, I think, in terms of regulatory constraints and logistic constraints to operate from Europe and ship goods to the US. Of course, there's some challenges, right? But compared to going the other way, I think the challenges are greater going to Europe than they are going to North America. And the trying to find a distributor in the US, we have distributors, of course, but it's difficult to have one distributor that's going to cover the entire US. And then you also have to keep in mind that a lot of distributors, the contracts tend to be more restrictive than they would be with an independent sales rep. If you have an independent sales rep, you have the ease of switching to your own internal sales force or working with a distributor later. The contracts are just more flexible and you have that control over the relationship with the customer.
And the other thing is distributor relationships are important. It's always good to have your product repped by Thermo or one of the big distributors. But the problem is that, yeah, they have a lot of salespeople and they have a lot of access. They also have 80,000 SKUs in their catalog.
Yeah.
And it's you and 79,000 others. And so the challenge is getting the largest distributor to have any focus whatsoever on your product. And within these organizations, what you have to understand is that those sales reps are given a dollar quota that they have to hit every quarter. And nobody inside Thermo cares how they hit the quota. They can exclusively sell just one product if they're able to hit their quota and exceed it every single quarter. And so it can be very difficult to get any level of focus through the big distributor. Where with an independent sales rep, because they're repping a much smaller range of usually very closely related products, then you're going to get a significantly bigger fraction of their time. And I'll give you a good example. When I was at the same company, I had field sales team covering different territories in the US, and we also had a relationship with Thermo. And one of the things I did was I had my sales reps work closely with the Thermo reps, where the Thermo reps would give me access to labs that would otherwise be difficult to get into. And we had this one issue at UCLA where there was a particular rep that had absolutely no interest in working with us, didn't want to meet with us, didn't want to partner up with our regional rep out there, our inside rep out there. And so I ended up having dinner at some point with the regional VP that covered the West Coast sales territory for Thermo and ask about this particular rep. And the VP explained that basically this rep is one of his top performing reps in the territory. And they make quota by pretty much just selling refrigerators. That's it. And the deal was that as long as this rep is exceeding quota, don't really care what they're selling. And so if you can often run into a situation like that where it's just difficult to get any kind of brain space in that distributor rep, where with an independent rep, you've got a much closer relationship and a relationship that is much, much more aligned with your particular product. And especially if you've got a unique or a narrow focus product.
Right. But you can run into, there's a wide spectrum of types of independent sales reps. And the flavor you want is going to depend on the type of product you're selling and the maturity in your market and all of those things. That I think I'm on the end of the spectrum where I tend to take more missionary type products where you really need somebody to do a lot of active prospecting and manually promote the product. There are other independent reps that will run larger catalogs and think about things like tissue culture hoods and refrigerators and incubators. There are independent rep agencies that do those things too. And they're not generally making cold calls to sell those refrigerators. And if they have 20 product lines in an agency, they may not give equal priority to all of those product lines. They may look at, okay, how easy are different products to sell and how much commission can we make on one product relative to another. So you really have to understand where your product fits in a rep's portfolio or a distributor's portfolio.
Right. And so that goes back to what do you need to ask about when you're evaluating a rep? Because not all reps, even if you have a collection of reps who are all very good, they're not all created equal for you. So you really have to find the rep that is going to be well aligned with the nature of the product you're selling and the type of labs that you're trying to sell into.
Yeah. So it's hard. In the research side of life science, upstream drug discovery, where I tend to focus, there's relatively few independent reps compared to the demand. And so that places a lot of manufacturers, I think, in a difficult position because they may have done a search and only found like maybe 3-4 candidates. And it's better it's better to go another route than to get the wrong independent rep or the wrong distributor. And by wrong, you haven't done your homework and you don't understand that fit. The questions you want to ask are, what are you going to do to promote and sell my product? How do you work? You have to understand that. Some reps do not really want to do any outbound work at all. They want to take inbound leads and then work those through the sales process and close a deal. And that's all they want to do. And if that can work, as long as your marketing engine can provide those inbound leads, that can be actually a very good partnership. But if there are no inbound leads, and if you don't have that marketing engine to support the rep downstream, you're going to be disappointed.
Right. And this is the other thing, is that the rep isn't like a fire it and forget it drone, that you've got to have a very close working relationship between the rep, your own internal salespeople, and your internal marketing group, and any external marketing that you're doing. Because that rep is not going to just magically make dollars rain out of the sky, that they're going to need marketing materials. That rep is going to work a lot better if you can give them leads. So it really needs to be a partnership, and that rep needs to be a direct extension of everything that you're doing internally. And again, you have the same issue with landing a contract with a big distributor. I've seen countless numbers of companies who are in the mistaken belief that all they need is a contract with Thermo and all their problems will be solved. And they finally get that contract with Thermo and literally nothing moves off the shelf.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand how the process works. And certainly in the case of a big distributor, the value of those reps have more to do with giving you access than selling your goods. What I found was that I would partner my internal reps with the Thermo reps, and I would use the Thermo rep to get me through the locked door in front of the right person, make an introduction, and then my rep would have the technical details to close the deal. And then we would split the commission on it.
Yeah.
So you've got to think through what's the strategy of how you're going to be able to help, how you're going to get the most out of that rep, and how you're going to be able to help that rep be able to make sure that your product moves.
Right. Yeah. So most people underestimate the time investment required. So if you're a startup company, especially if you're coming from a more scientific or engineering background, and it's your startup company and you founded it and you built the plant, the R&D, and you've got product that you're building, a lot of times you then don't have the experience managing either employees or independent reps or distributors. And there's different tactics to manage those different types. And they all share sort of general commercial management principles in terms of, you have to have an ideal customer profile. You have to have market segment. You have to have target accounts. You have to have a sales process. And a good independent rep will be able to help with that. But you can't hire somebody on commission and then expect them to develop the ICP and run with that and be successful right away. It's going to work a lot better if you are helping drive that. And the partnerships that I have that tend to work best are when there's that collaboration to do that, because I know what a good ICP looks like, and the The manufacturer, the founder knows what their product is supposed to be doing, why it was invented. And usually we can figure that out together. But when there's not that dialogue, it's much more difficult.
And the other part is that rep is going to need the sort of sales collateral and the sales enablement components to do their job. Because if you send the rep out there with nothing but the name of your product, they're going to be less successful than if you send them out there with a really nicely done one pager that they can use as a leave behind. Or if you've got some explainer videos on your website that the rep can take them to and show them how the product is used. You need to arm that rep with enough tools to let them do their job and to let them do their job efficiently. That rep is not going to be producing videos for you. They're not going to be producing sales decks. They're not going to be producing print collateral. That's your job as the company that's hiring that rep. And you're going to get a lot more out of that relationship if you make sure you arm them with all of the tools they need to be able to make them as efficient as possible when they get in front of a customer.
Yeah.
So how do people find one of these sales reps other than calling you?
You can always do the LinkedIn search, right? We're on LinkedIn. You're 3 keywords away from finding an independent sales rep. And again, you can also contact me. I am not looking to drastically expand my portfolio, and I'm very specialized, but I also know other independent reps that might fit different niches. So the referral network is quite strong. I give a lot of referrals to other reps. There's a couple of commercial sources on the internet where you can look. So there's rephunter.com. That is a sort of a directory of independent sales reps. There's the Manufacturers Agents National Association, or MANA, M-A-N-A, and they also run a directory of independent reps. Both of those sites they're not specific to life science. So you're going to get a variety of independent reps selling everything from cosmetics to scientific and technical equipment. And then on the clinical side, interestingly, I mentioned there in upstream drug discovery, there's really not a lot of independent reps, but there's quite a healthy amount of reps that do medical devices. And so if you're in the clinical space, especially in the device or diagnostic space, you should be able to Google and LinkedIn search and find different reps and agencies. But also there's one directory I know of called MedSeps. I'll throw that in the comments, which is specific to medical device sales representatives who are independent. And those are all the places that I would look.
Right. And I do a lot of work in diagnostics and some in medical device. So not just research biotech. And there is a huge challenge in medical device and diagnostics with just getting access, getting in front of the right person, or even knowing who the right person is to get in front of. And this can be a real challenge to an early stage company that's launching a product, because it is very difficult and very confusing, much, much harder than getting in front of a PI in a research lab at a university. And so again, having that independent rep or a distributor rep, either, both of these have the advantage of they will often already have access to the people that especially if you pick the right rep, to the people that you need to be getting your stuff in front of. And what I have seen is that you can go a year or more with a new rep and a new product before you really start to crack the code on how to identify the right person and then get in front of that right person, especially if you're selling into the clinical environment.
So that's another good source for referrals, is talk to the customers, because especially in the clinical environment, your doctors are going to know who the independent reps are. And you can say, hey, which independent reps do you work with? Are there any that you particularly like? And on the research side, I've had a couple of good referrals from customers that know I'm independent and that know what my portfolio is targeting. And it's great when I have a customer I've had a relationship with for several years refer a new client to me.
Yeah. Last question. How much is all this going to cost me?
Yeah, everybody wants to know. So the general business model for independent reps is you're selling on commission, and that commission usually gets paid after the sale. So that's just the general case. And then you might have different models, especially if there's no existing accounts for the rep to take over, or if there's a long lead time to sell a product. You might have some upfront payments. You might have an hourly component. It's flexible based on where the value is added. Those are the best contracts, are the ones that reflect the effort and the risk that the rep is taking, and position the reward appropriate to those efforts. Numbers wise, you could be anywhere from 2 to 30% commission for a product. My own commissions have historically have ranged from 6% to 22%. And those vary based on if it's an ELISA kit, it's going to be lower on the spectrum there because it's a lower cost item, shorter sales cycle, less effort to sell. If it's a large piece of imaging equipment that's 6 figures and takes an average sales cycle is 9 to 12 months, that's going to be on the higher end because I have to work through that whole process before I can get paid at the very end. That's in contrast to distributor pricing, which is going to be north of 25% for sure.
My experience is my general rule of thumb when looking at distributor relationships is it's going to be in the neighborhood of about 30 to 40%.
Yeah, that's what I see also.
So they're expensive, but you also get access to theoretically 6 or 7 or 800 salespeople. But in fact, you only get a minusculely thin slice of their attention, which is the challenge.
The way to figure that out, though, is to look and say, okay, if I have my product, how much am I budgeting in cost of sales to commercialize? And that's the marketing, the sales, transaction costs, all that stuff, retention costs. And then how much of that can I devote to the portion of that work that's dealing one-on-one with customers, which is what independent reps are generally going to do. And if you do that calculation, you say, okay, I have 10% of revenue that I can allocate to an independent sales rep, then you've got a good starting point and you can talk to independent reps and say, okay, we estimate our sales at this for this commission rate. What would you be willing to do? That's one way to approach it.
So what about things like travel?
That's going to vary from rep to rep and agency to agency. Generally, my own rule is if I am arranging the travel and if I'm deciding how to spend my time in different places, I bear that cost. I know other reps don't do that. They will expense out the travel costs to the client much the same way an employee would. So that has to be accounted for in the commission percentage.
Right. And my own experience in the past running fairly large inside sales teams. I ran an 18-person Western Hemisphere inside sales team with additional outside reps, as well as an inside sales team as well. And my rule of thumb was that whatever the base salary of the employee is, I need to budget 100% excess. If their base salary is 125, I figure it's going to cost me about $250,000 a year for that person to operate. So that's going to cover their travel, their commissions, any additional social burden expenses above their base salary that you have to pay, Social Security and Medicare and all of that, and plus any employee benefits. But the rough rule of thumb was base salary, double it.
Yeah.
And salespeople are expensive. And so this is why if you can get a rep that is already out in the field, already has relationships, already has things rolling, that they can layer one additional product into their portfolio, you've got the ability to come in at a lot, certainly in the early days, at a much lower cost to get that product sold. And you're going to have an environment where you're going to be physically moving product fairly quickly rather than having to go through a long build-up cycle as your inside reps are trying to develop relationships and figure out how the market works.
Yeah. And most commission-based arrangements, you're not going to have to actually pay until the product is sold. So you have that buffer. If you have uncertainty about your market potential, that's going to be a problem for your rep. But at the same time, it can be a way for you to manage that risk by contracting with people and then paying based on performance.
So I think that's it for today.
Good conversation, Dale.
I'm sorry?
Good conversation.
It was. It's hopefully this helps people because these are certainly for early stage companies where you don't have a lot of, or the founders don't have a lot of commercial experience. These are very arcane, complicated topics that is just not always obvious, how you go about solving these. And so hopefully this will give people some sort of sense. And again, reach out to either one of us if you have any questions, because we both have a lot of experience coming from somewhat different angles on this topic. And we know that there's a lot of confusion out there.
Great.
So until next week.
See you next week, Dale.
Thanks. Bye.